In 1856, a surveyor in Iowa stopped his work and sent a letter to the State Historical Society. He didn't explain what he found. He only wrote that certain measurements didn't correspond to any known population. The letter was filed. Then it was referenced in an 1887 cadastral report. After that, it disappears from the archive. What remains is a single notation in the margin. Structural origin unknown. That surveyor was mapping property boundaries in what is now Louisa County. His job was to record landmarks, estimate ages of buildings, and note prior occupancy. He did this across 12 townships. In 11 of them, his reports are standard. In the 12th, his tone changes. He describes doorways. He describes ceiling heights. He describes foundations that descend further than necessary. He does not say who built them. He only notes they were already abandoned. The official record calls them early settler structures. That explanation works for most of what was found. It doesn't explain why the door frames average 8.5 feet. It doesn't explain why support beams are placed at heights no one would need to walk beneath unless they stood well over 7 feet tall. And it doesn't explain why the root cellars in these structures go down 11 feet when 4 feet was standard and sufficient. There are no names attached to these buildings in the 1856 survey. There are no land grants that correspond to them. They appear on the map, but not in the ownership records. When later surveys were conducted in 1868 and 1881, the structures were no longer mentioned. Not demolished, not repurposed, just absent from the file. In 1876, a county clerk recorded the transfer of a property near the original survey site. In his notes, he describes the land as previously inhabited. He mentions stone thresholds too large to remove. He writes that the new owner had to build around them. The thresholds measured 14 inches thick and ran the full width of openings that were 9 feet across. The clerk noted this was unusual. He did not note why anyone would install them. If you measure a standard doorway from that period, it's 6.5 feet tall, maybe 30 inches wide. These were not standard. They were functional, but not for the people who arrived afterward. The people who moved onto these properties did not adjust the doorways. They built new entrances beside them. That pattern repeats in 3 other townships. New construction next to old openings. Old openings that were left intact but unused. There's a table in the Iowa State Historical Library. It's listed in the 1889 catalog under county materials. The entry describes it as frontier craftsmanship, origin unclear. It was donated in 1883 by a family clearing land near the surveyed area. The table is 42 inches tall. Standard tables at the time were 29 to 30 inches. This one is functional. The joints are tight. The surface is worn smooth from use. It wasn't decorative. It was built to be sat at by someone taller. In the same catalog, there's a reference to a chair. The seat height is listed as 26 inches. That's 8 inches higher than typical chairs of the period. The backrest extends to 54 inches. It was also donated in 1883. It was also described as origin unclear. Both items were stored together and labeled prairie furniture. In 1902, they were transferred to a private collection. No record of which collection. No record of who authorized the transfer. Once you start measuring, the pattern continues. A staircase documented in an 1859 property assessment shows riser heights of 11 inches. Standard risers are 7 to 8 inches. The stairs were still in use when assessed, but the new occupants had installed a secondary set of stairs beside them. The original stairs remained. They were just no longer practical. The assessment notes this without comment. It only records that 2 staircases existed where one would serve. There are photographs. Not many, but enough. One shows a farmhouse near the surveyed area, dated 1868. In the background, there's a barn. The door to that barn is visible. It's propped open. You can see the interior. The height of that doorway, measured against the fence posts in the foreground, is at least 9 feet. The barn is still standing. The doorway was reduced in size sometime before 1910. The original frame is still there. You can see where new wood was added to lower the height. Another photograph from 1874 shows a row of homes built along the township line. The foundations are visible. They're limestone, set deep into the ground. One of the homes has a cellar entrance at the side. The entrance is open. The depth is clear from the shadow angle and the steps. It's not 4 feet. It's not 6 feet. It's deeper than any cellar would need to be unless it was meant for storage of a kind that required headroom. Or it was built by someone who needed that headroom. What's strange is not that these structures exist. It's that they were already old when American settlers arrived. The surveyor's letter suggests prior occupancy, but it doesn't identify who. The land records don't show purchases or grants before 1848. That leaves an 8-year gap. 8 years where structures existed, were used, and then were vacated. And no documentation of who was there. In 1897, a state geologist conducted a mineral survey in the same region. His report includes a section on excavated remains. He describes foundations uncovered during railroad construction. The foundations were not marked on any prior map. They were not listed in property records. They were just there under the soil. He notes the stonework is fitted without mortar in some places. He notes the dimensions suggest non-residential use. He does not say what use. He only writes that they were substantial enough to have required coordinated effort. That report was published. Then a revised version was issued in 1899. The section on excavated foundations is shorter. The details about stonework are removed. The dimensions are not included. The revised version states only that minor structural remnants were found and that they likely related to early agricultural activity. It does not explain what changed. It does not explain why the first version needed correction. There are letters in the State Archive from 1858 to 1862. Farmers writing to the county land office. Some of them mention clearing prior structures from their fields. One letter describes stone walls that required teams of horses to remove. Another describes timber framing too heavy to repurpose. A third describes finding tools in a collapsed shed. The tools were larger than standard. The letter writer asks if anyone knows where such tools were made. There is no reply in the file. By 1870, references to prior structures decline sharply. Land transfers from that period describe properties as undeveloped or lightly improved. Even in cases where previous letters mentioned cleared foundations, the later records make no note of them. It's not that the structures disappeared. It's that the documentation of them stopped. In 1881, the county conducted a new survey. The lead surveyor was asked to compare his findings to the 1856 survey. His report states that many landmarks noted in the original were no longer present or could not be confirmed. He attributes this to natural erosion and typical settlement turnover. He does not address the door frames. He does not address the cellars. He does not address the furniture or the tools. He only writes that the landscape had normalized. That word shows up again in an 1894 census report. The author describes the region as now fully normalized in terms of infrastructure and occupancy. The phrase is unusual. Normalized suggests something was abnormal before. The report does not clarify what. It only moves forward. There's a gap in the photographic record as well. Between 1862 and 1869, very few images of the area exist. When images resume, the structures that appeared in earlier photos are either gone or modified. Doorways are shorter. Foundations are covered. The barn from the 1868 photograph is photographed again in 1903. The door is different. The height is reduced, but the original lintel is still visible above the new frame. No explanation is given for the change. What kind of event creates that kind of alteration? Not fire, not flood, not war. Those leave traces. Those get recorded. This is different. This is methodical. Structures remain standing, but their proportions are corrected. Records remain in the archive, but details are softened. Measurements are acknowledged, then reinterpreted, then omitted, and no one writes down why. If you go back to the 1856 letter, there's one line that wasn't quoted in any of the later reports. The surveyor wrote that he could not determine when the structures were built, only that they were already weathered when he arrived. He estimated they had been standing for at least 20 years. That places their construction in the 1830s. But Iowa wasn't open to large-scale American settlement until the late 1830s, and this region wasn't surveyed for homesteading until the mid-1840s. So who was building in the 1830s? And why did they leave? There are no burial records for the area that match the timeline. There are no obituaries. There are no land sale notices that predate the official settlement period. There are property claims filed in 1848 and after, but none of them mention purchasing from a prior owner. They're filed as original claims, as if the land had never been occupied, as if the structures had simply appeared. In 1912, a history of Louisa County was published. It mentions early settlers, frontier hardship, and rapid development. It includes a chapter on architecture. That chapter describes log cabins, frame houses, and masonry barns built by arriving families in the 1840s and 1850s. It does not mention doorways that required modification. It does not mention furniture that didn't fit the people using it. It does not mention the surveyor's letter. The chapter presents the county's development as linear and ordinary. Nothing interrupted, nothing unexplained. But in the appendix, there's a footnote. It references unverified reports of pre-settlement structures. It states these reports could not be corroborated and may reflect misidentification of natural formations or indigenous earthworks. That explanation might work if the structures were earthen. They weren't. They were limestone and timber. They had doors. They had windows. They had stairs. And they were built at a scale that required explanation, not dismissal. The photographs still exist. The letters still exist. The measurements still exist. They're scattered across archives, labeled vaguely, cross-referenced poorly. If you gather them together, they suggest a sequence. First, construction, then occupancy, then sudden vacancy, then American settlement, then documentation, then modification, then silence. That sequence doesn't fit the standard narrative. It implies something else happened, something that required adjustment, not of the land, of the record. There's another photograph worth noting. It was taken in 1879 during a county fair. In the background, behind the exhibition tents, there's a structure. It appears to be a storage building or possibly a meeting hall. The roof line is visible. So is the door. The people standing near it provide scale. The door is at least 8.5 feet tall. The building was still in use at the time. By 1889, it no longer appears in photographs of the same location. There's no record of it being torn down. It's just gone from the visual record. In the same decade, a newspaper in a neighboring county ran a brief article about unusual finds during well digging. The article mentions workers encountering stone foundations at depths that suggested prior construction. The foundations were described as unusually robust. The article notes that similar findings had been reported in adjoining counties, but that no formal study had been conducted. The article ends by stating that the matter was of local curiosity only. It was never followed up. What's notable is the language used. Local curiosity, not historical significance, not archaeological interest, just curiosity. That framing appears in other documents from the period. It suggests awareness without investigation. It acknowledges something exists without examining what it means. In 1885, a land office clerk wrote a memo about disputed property lines in the surveyed townships. The memo references original survey markers that could not be located. It mentions structures that were noted in early surveys but no longer corresponded to current maps. The clerk suggests that errors may have occurred in the original surveying process. He recommends that future surveys disregard earlier notations that cannot be verified. That recommendation was adopted. The 1856 survey was effectively superseded. There's a court record from 1891, a property dispute in Louisa County. One party claims ownership based on occupation of a structure that predates the official land grant. The other party argues that no such structure existed at the time of the grant. The judge rules in favor of the second party. In his ruling, he states that structures of uncertain origin cannot form the basis of land claims. He writes that the county's legal framework begins with the official survey, not with prior occupation. The ruling sets a precedent. After that, references to pre-settlement structures carry no legal weight. That legal shift coincides with the decline in documentation. If prior structures cannot establish claims, there's no incentive to document them. If their origins are uncertain, there's no reason to preserve the record. The structures become irrelevant to the legal and administrative process. They fade from official memory, but they don't disappear entirely. In private letters, in family histories, in local anecdotes, the memory persists. A farmer writes to his brother in 1903 about finding oversized hand tools while plowing a field. A teacher in 1908 records a story told by an elderly student about a grandfather who cleared a building with doorways so tall he thought it was a church. A county historian in 1915 makes a note in his journal about persistent rumors of giant occupants in the early territorial period. He dismisses the rumors as folk mythology. He does not explain where the mythology came from. The language shifts over time. What was described in the 1850s as structural anomaly becomes frontier legend by the 1890s. What was measured and documented becomes misremembered and embellished. The details soften, the precision fades, and eventually the story becomes something that happened to someone else, somewhere else, at some other time. The connection to the original survey, to the specific measurements, to the documented structures is lost. But the measurements don't change. A doorway that was 8.5 feet tall in 1856 is still 8.5 feet tall if the structure survives. A table that was 42 inches high doesn't shrink because the documentation is reclassified. The physical evidence remains constant. It's the interpretation that shifts. In 1923, a WPA survey crew was tasked with documenting historical buildings in eastern Iowa. Their report includes several structures in Louisa County. Most are described as typical frontier architecture. One is listed as origin uncertain. The description notes unusually high ceilings and oversized entry points. The crew recommends further study. That study was never conducted. The building was demolished in 1931 to make way for a state highway. No photographs were taken before demolition. The report is the only record that it existed. What does it mean when a building is demolished without documentation? It means someone decided it wasn't worth preserving. Or it means someone decided it was better not to preserve it. There's a difference between neglect and intention. Neglect leaves traces. Intention removes them. The pattern extends beyond Louisa County. In adjacent counties, similar reports appear. Door frames that don't match standard proportions. Foundations that go deeper than necessary. Furniture that seems out of scale. The reports are scattered. They're filed under different categories. Local history, agricultural development, infrastructure surveys. They're not connected, but if you lay them side by side, they describe the same thing. A landscape that was occupied before the official record begins, and an occupancy that involved people or a population that required different proportions. The question isn't whether the structures existed. The documentation confirms they did. The question is why their existence was treated as incidental. Why were measurements noted but not analyzed? Why were patterns observed but not investigated? Why was the record allowed to fragment? There are possible explanations: limited resources, competing priorities, lack of academic interest in frontier anomalies. All of those are reasonable, but they don't explain the revisions. They don't explain why published reports were reissued with details removed. They don't explain why survey data was superseded rather than updated. Those actions require intention. They require someone making a decision about what should and shouldn't remain in the record. In 1934, an amateur historian in Iowa published a pamphlet about forgotten history of the state. He includes a section on the giants of 1856. He describes the survey, the measurements, the furniture. He argues that the evidence points to a population of unusual height that occupied the region before American settlement. The pamphlet is not widely distributed. It's mentioned briefly in a historical society newsletter, then dismissed as speculative. The author does not publish again. The pamphlet becomes a collector's item. Rare, unverified, interesting but not credible. Why is direct documentation considered speculative while absence of documentation is considered conclusive? The surveyor measured the doorways. He recorded the measurements. He noted they didn't correspond to known populations. That's not speculation. That's observation. But by 1934, the observation has been reframed. It's no longer data. It's a claim. And claims require proof beyond what observation provides. The shift happens gradually. What was once a record becomes a story. What was once a measurement becomes an estimate. What was once a question becomes a myth. And once something is categorized as myth, it no longer requires explanation. It only requires dismissal. But the structures were real. The measurements were real. The documentation was real. And the gaps in the record are real. If you accept the measurements, you have to ask why they exist. If you accept the gaps, you have to ask what they conceal. And if you accept that both exist in the same timeline, you have to consider what kind of event creates that combination. Not migration. Migration leaves records. Not disaster. Disaster leaves remains. Not conflict. Conflict leaves accounts. This is something else. This is removal from the record without removal from the landscape. Until the landscape itself is altered to match the revised record. The last known reference to the original survey appears in a 1958 academic paper on frontier cartography. The paper briefly mentions anomalies in early Iowa surveys. It notes that some survey reports contain measurements that appear inconsistent with known settlement patterns. It suggests these inconsistencies may reflect errors in transcription or interpretation. The paper does not examine the original documents. It only references summaries. It concludes that further research is unlikely to yield significant findings. After 1958, the survey is no longer cited. It remains in the archive. It's accessible, but it's not referenced. It exists in the record without being part of the record. And the structures it describes exist in memory without existing in history. What happens when documentation outlives interpretation? When the data remains but the context is removed. You're left with measurements that suggest something, photographs that show something, letters that describe something, but no framework to hold them together. No narrative to explain why they matter, unless you build that framework yourself. Unless you gather the scattered pieces and ask what they imply when placed in sequence. And when you do that, the implication is uncomfortable. It suggests the landscape was occupied, then vacated, then reoccupied, and that the second occupancy required erasing evidence of the first. Not completely, just enough. Enough that the record fractures. Enough that the pattern becomes difficult to see unless you're looking for it. And most people aren't looking for it. Why would they? The official history is complete. The timeline is clear. The story makes sense. There's no reason to question it unless you find something that doesn't fit. A doorway, a table, a letter, a photograph. And once you find one, you start noticing others. And once you notice others, you start asking why no one else is noticing them. Maybe they are. Maybe they noticed a long time ago. And maybe they decided it was better to let the record settle. To let the structures be modified. To let the measurements fade. To let the questions go unanswered. Because some questions don't have answers that fit into the existing narrative. And if the answer doesn't fit, maybe it's easier to remove the question. If this gave you something to think about, stay for what comes next. Like the video if it raised questions you hadn't considered. Comment if you've come across something similar. Subscribe if you want to see where these gaps in the record lead.